What we learned from digging into all of these cases is that they aren't just bad guys getting killed in the middle of a robbery. This could happen to any family, calling for help when a loved one is suicidal or on drugs or having a mental crisis. Several had committed no crime, had no weapon, and all of the officers were found to be justified anyway.
And we want to know what happened to her and why she's dead.
There is no question Lori Knowles called 911 for help.
I'm so ready to help. I need help right now.
Her husband was rushing home and also called 911.
She is bipolar and she takes medication. She told me that she took too much of her medication. Please don't hurt her.
But police had already shot his wife. They forced their way into the home when she didn't answer the door. She had a gun at her side.
The officers tried to get her to comply with orders to show her hands, but she made an offensive movement towards the weapon.
Channel 2 Action News and the Atlanta Journal-Constitution examined nearly 170 cases of Georgians shot and killed by police in the past 5 years. Roughly 40% were shot at their own home or a relative's home.
Life can change in a second. You lose your whole world.
For Tanisha Fellio, that happened in December 2010 when she called police to her Lawrenceville home to help her husband.
It scared me because I never seen him that way, ever.
After 6 years of marriage, James Fellio had suddenly turned violent. She wanted a mental evaluation and waited for him to fall asleep to ease the police encounter. But within 10 minutes of waking him, police shot him, saying he tried to grab an officer's gun.
It's like life is not valued. You took away somebody's husband, somebody's daddy.
Roughly half of those shot at home were experiencing some sort of mental break or were suicidal.
Who killed him? Who shot him?
Pure anguish from the father of James Clark, who had tried to kill himself after a romantic breakup. A friend called Gwinnett Police for help.
She told me to leave right now. It's not safe for me to be there, and I'm worried about him.
James sat in his driveway with a gun at his side. Police repeatedly ordered him to drop it. He stood and walked toward police, and they shot him.
Something occurred where the officers felt threatened.
It was my baby. It was my youngest son.
His family will never understand.
Let's shoot a suicidal person? Is that how they deal with things here?
Dwight Person was visiting his nephew when East Point police raided looking for drugs. They say Person made a threatening gesture. The 54-year-old veteran was unarmed. Christopher Roop's only crime was answering the door with a video game controller in his hand. Hugh Harley police were looking for his dad. But records show nearly half of the shot-at-home cases actually started with a call for help.
We were devastated.
Delisa Davis's brother Kevin called 911 after a roommate attacked his girlfriend.
He called to be protected and served. You know, instead they came in and they killed him.
The DeKalb officer says no one answered, so he opened the apartment door and Kevin's dog ran out. The officer shot the dog, then moments later shot Kevin, who had grabbed his gun thinking the attacker had returned. Kevin was still on the phone with 911.
Why didn't you give him an opportunity to drop the gun? You know, he's in his own home.
It's been 5 years since gunshots shattered Caroline Small's windshield and Gabby McGuire's faith in the justice system.
It never sounded right. Never, ever.
Gabby named her transitional house Caroline's in honor of the friend she lost at the hands of 2 Glenn County police officers.
I talked to her the night before she was shot. She was not okay in her head.
Caroline was in therapy for mental illness and had battled addiction since she was a teen. During her sober years, she helped other women struggling like her.
She was very loving, a very good mother. She loved life.
We'll never know why she took off when an officer approached her car, but her family's attorney is even more baffled by what happened next.
There's no question she bears a great deal of responsibility for what happened to her. She deserved to go to jail. She didn't deserve to die.
Caroline was unarmed and riding on rims with her car pinned by police.
There was nothing in my mind that justified them shooting her.
Rick Curry was the Waycross District Attorney who reviewed the case for the Glenn DA.
They should have been prosecuted. There's no doubt about that.
He says if this trooper was in fear for his life, he wouldn't have tried to get Caroline out of the car, only retreating once officers Corey Sasser and Todd Simpson pointed their guns.
Everything was right there on the tape. I really don't know how the grand jury didn't indict.
We wanted to find out from courthouse records.
We were not handed anything like this.
And grand jurors who were there.
She definitely wasn't pushing for an indictment, no question about that.
Glynn County District Attorney Jackie Johnson refused our requests for an on-camera interview. We wanted to ask about these deals she made with the officers, agreeing not to present this indictment she'd written for felony murder, manslaughter, and violation of oath.
I think I voted the wrong way. We need to hear the whole side. He should have went to regular court.
But it didn't. Byron Bennett says with no deliberation, they voted once by show of hands. It's haunted him from the moment he left the courthouse.
We failed that lady. We failed the process.
That's not any kind of grand jury I've ever been a part of.
GBI agent Mike McDaniel supervised the investigation.
Do you think something needed to happen to these officers?
Yes, I do.
But the DA allowed police to counter the GBI and present details from their own investigation, which cleared the officers, including this animation created to show how Caroline could have run them over and escaped.
Those measurements in that cartoon are not correct.
Records show the police chief had discussed the case with the brand new DA before she even took office.
Your department produced an inaccurate video and then gave it to the district attorney to use in her grand jury proceeding.
Well, you have to understand, the DA had the choice to accept that and present it. She didn't have to present that.
Gabby says even 5 years later, the truth needs to be told.
Bringing it out to light is the best thing. Will it save Caroline's life? No, but it might save somebody else's life.
It's been 3.5 years since Ariston Waiter's death, but his mother's wounds haven't even begun to heal. She keeps hearing new details the grand jury never heard. We tracked down a half dozen officers who each tell part of the story, and some question whether their fellow officer was over the line.
Hey, I got this one.
Union City, December 2011. An unarmed black teenager shot twice in the back while already lying face down on the ground.
I just went to screaming and hollering, no, no, no. My son is not dead.
Frida Waiter's son Ariston had taken off running after a fight between teenagers. Officer Luther Lewis caught up to him.
And the way he said the story happened, that's impossible.
My mind's telling me he's fixing to pull a gun out, and I'm like freaking flipping out.
In this previously undisclosed video, Lewis used a GBI agent to show how he says Ariston tried to grab his gun, reaching behind and up from the ground.
Yes, and I went with everything I had. Bam, bam.
But an expert found Lewis's statements to be inconsistent with the forensic evidence and called his actions contrary to all standards, with a disregard for human life that is unacceptable.
Even if the deceased in this case had physically defended himself, that he had a right to do it, because he was being illegally arrested.
But in May 2012, a grand jury voted not to charge Lewis with felony murder, false imprisonment, or violating his oath.
What I told the grand jury that night is the type of person I am. Had someone else had a gun and been shooting that night and Ariston Waiter was standing there, I would have put him behind me and I would have took a bullet.
Lewis talked to Channel 2 right after the grand jury, but refuses to talk about the case now. The Justice Department declined to intervene.
No, I was actually waiting to hear from the FBI.
Union City officer Chris McElroy was the first supervisor to arrive after the shooting. He has never spoken publicly about what he heard and saw.
It's not set right with me from the very first time I arrived on the scene.
He says at first, Lewis made no mention of a struggle for the gun, instead saying Waiters was hiding one of his hands. But McElroy says the chief told him not to write a statement and later bragged about keeping Lewis out of prison.
Was this a good shoot in your mind?
Not in my mind.
A few months earlier, in the Brookstone neighborhood, McElroy rolled up on Lewis with his gun pointed in another suspect's back.
When Officer Lewis explained that he suspected the young man had something in his pocket and he couldn't get his hands out and said I was fixing to shoot him.
Lewis also used force on Royal South Parkway a year before the Waiters shooting. He fired 4 rounds, claiming someone had shot at him, but investigators questioned whether it really happened.
Everyone had concerns that he had issues.
A captain had already counseled Lewis, concerned he was suffering from PTSD. A sergeant wrote him up after a raid where Lewis saw movement in a house that turned out to be empty. But Lewis's disciplinary file was also empty.
The files that we received from the police department were not that helpful.
The DA says he was not aware of Lewis's history, so neither was the grand jury.
Listening to what you're saying today, I'm going to be looking very closely at representing it.
Frida Waiters just wants everyone to know the truth.
And my son is dead and gone. I can't get him back. But I am going to get justice for my son.
We've spotlighted several cases this year which raised serious questions about the grand jury process here in Georgia. It's different from every other state. Not one of our deadly officer shootings in the last 5 years went to trial. Now the state's prosecutors and a powerful legislator want to change the law to eliminate some of that special treatment, which can stack the deck in officers' favor.
Prosecutors say it's cases like this one that explain their frustration. An unarmed teen who'd committed no crime, shot in the back by an officer. The DA called it murder. Then the officer tearfully told his side after hearing all of the evidence against him. 2 different grand juries voted not to indict him.
There's no doubt that some of the cases that have been in the news lately have drawn that more public attention to it.
Georgia's Prosecuting Attorneys Council says now is the time to change state law. Last week, our investigation revealed not one of the last 171 deadly police shootings went to trial.
There's some issues with the integrity of the system when the accused is actually present during the entire presentation of evidence.
Georgia is the only state that allows officers facing possible indictment to sit in on the entire grand jury process, hear all of the witnesses, and then make a closing statement that cannot be questioned or challenged by prosecutors or grand jurors.
The process itself inside that room has got to be above question.
Representative Rich Golick chairs the committee that would change the law and now plans to champion that effort.
This is the first time that I've, sensed a push coming. And then when you combine that with real-world examples of how the process potentially has been undermined, that's a situation that demands us to take a hard look at it.
The prosecutors say officers should come in, make their statement, be cross-examined, and then leave the room like any other witness, but that the officers should still be an important part of the process.
Nobody knows what those guys are faced with until you've done that job. Till you've made those kind of decisions in the dark of night when you're off by yourself in the middle of nowhere, and that the grand jury needs to hear from them if they want to be heard.
We're talking about data no one else has tracked, so we and our news partners at the AJC spent a year digging through all of the case files, 184 of them, to answer key questions. Are blacks really targeted more often? Is the officer's life always in danger? And is it possible that every single one of these shootings was really justified?
I just kind of been there. Maybe it was something I could have done. Maybe this would not have happened.
Rosa Hampton's grief over losing her son Maurice is still just as raw as it was in June 2011 when he was shot by an Atlanta police officer.
Shot in the back, no weapon.
It's not as unusual as you might think. Records show 90 Georgians killed by police in the last 5 years were either unarmed, shot in the back, or both. That's nearly half of all 184 cases.
I have a problem with that because I just don't see the threat.
Attorney Max Richardson represented the Hampton family in a federal lawsuit.
It pierced my soul to lose a case like that, knowing what the family had to go through.
Maurice had no license and ran a stop sign. Then he ran from his van when the officer pulled him over. They tussled at the bottom of a hill. The only witness says Maurice looked like he was cuffed, but then broke away from the officer and ran again. That's when he was shot in the back. The absence of gunpowder suggests it was not close range.
The officer twisted the facts entirely in another direction.
Officer Thomas Atzert told a grand jury he used his pepper spray and baton, but that Maurice grabbed both away and began hitting him. His lawyer says the officer was in a fight for his life.
He pushed away and fired one shot to prevent him from turning around with a deadly weapon in his hand.
But prosecutors didn't believe that and tried to indict the officer for false statements, violating his oath, and murdering Maurice Hampton.
20 people who never met Officer Atzert listened to 19 hours of testimony and made a determination that Officer Atzert was telling the truth.
We obtained these never-released photos which show the officer's baton in Maurice's hand, but prosecutors thought the baton was planted and that Maurice may have been handcuffed before he was shot. Injuries to his teeth and face suggest he fell forward without using his hands to break his fall. One arm was cuffed when backup officers arrived, but Atzert said he did that after the shooting.
It was very concerning to me that we were looking at accusing everyone of a conspiracy when in fact there was evidence to support Officer Atzert's statement.
Grand jurors voted to clear the officer. In all 184 Georgia cases, not one officer has faced criminal charges.
They know that they can get away with it.
They know all they got to say is, I was in fear for my life.
Police files, autopsies, and court records all paint a picture of the lives lost. 69 were shot in their own home or that of a loved one. 1 in 4 had been treated for mental illness.
I would be devastated if nothing resulted from this, because we're not getting the job done. You know, we're not getting the true facts.